Sarah Martinez had always believed in second chances. Growing up in the rough neighborhoods of East Los Angeles, she learned early that trust was a luxury few could afford, yet she chose to give it freely. This philosophy would nearly cost her everything on a scorching Tuesday morning in September 2019. The day began like any other at the small logistics company where Sarah worked as a security coordinator. She arrived at 6 a.m., coffee in hand, ready to oversee the morning shift change at the warehouse that stored high-value electronics for various retailers. What she didn't know was that Marcus Chen, her boyfriend of 3 years and fellow security officer, had been planning this day for months. Marcus had seemed different lately. Sarah noticed the late-night phone calls he would take outside, the way he avoided her eyes when discussing work schedules, and how he had suddenly become interested in the warehouse's security protocols. When she asked about it, he would kiss her forehead and tell her not to worry. "Just trying to be better at my job," he would say with that charming smile that had first captured her heart. The warehouse sat on the edge of an industrial district, surrounded by empty lots and abandoned buildings. It was the perfect location for what Marcus had in mind. He had been feeding information to a crew of armed robbers for weeks, providing them with security schedules, camera blind spots, and the exact timing of valuable shipments. In return, he was promised $50,000 and a clean escape to Mexico. Sarah was conducting her usual morning inspection when she noticed something odd. The loading dock's security camera had been repositioned slightly, just enough to create a blind spot near the main entrance. Her training kicked in immediately. She reached for her radio to report the anomaly when she heard Marcus's voice behind her. "Don't touch that radio, Sarah." She turned around slowly, her heart sinking as she saw the gun in his hand. Behind him stood 3 men she had never seen before, all armed, all watching her with cold eyes. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Marcus, the man she had shared her bed with, the man she had introduced to her family, the man she had been planning a future with, had betrayed her in the worst possible way. "Marcus, what are you doing?" she whispered, though part of her already knew the answer. "What I have to do," he replied, but she could see the conflict in his eyes. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. You weren't supposed to be here this early. The crew leader, a tall man with facial tattoos, stepped forward impatiently. "We don't have time for this reunion. Take care of her so we can get to work." Sarah's mind raced. She knew the warehouse layout better than anyone. She knew where the emergency exits were, where the silent alarms were located, and most importantly, she knew that the morning shift would be arriving in 20 minutes. She also knew that if she didn't act soon, she would likely die in this building. "Marcus, please," she said, taking a small step backward toward the wall where she knew there was a hidden panic button. "We can work this out. Whatever they're paying you, we can figure something else out." But Marcus's expression had hardened. The man she had loved was gone, replaced by someone desperate and dangerous. "I'm sorry, Sarah, I really am. But I'm in too deep now." The first shot came without warning. Sarah dove behind a stack of pallets as the bullet shattered a computer monitor where her head had been seconds before. Her military training from her National Guard service kicked in instantly. She had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and knew how to move under fire. The warehouse erupted into chaos as the crew began their assault on the main vault. Alarms started blaring as Sarah managed to hit the panic button during her dive for cover. She knew help was coming, but she also knew it would take time. The nearest police station was 15 minutes away, and these men were professionals. As she crouched behind the pallets, Sarah felt a burning sensation in her left shoulder. The second shot had found its mark. Blood began seeping through her security uniform, but adrenaline kept her moving. She knew the warehouse's ventilation system included large air ducts that could provide both cover and mobility. The third shot caught her in the leg as she made her way toward the maintenance ladder that led to the ductwork. She stumbled but kept moving, driven by a combination of survival instinct and growing anger. Marcus shouted something to the other men, but his words were lost in the sound of gunfire and alarms. Sarah managed to reach the ladder and began climbing, leaving a trail of blood behind her. The fourth shot hit her in the lower back as she pulled herself into the ductwork. The pain was excruciating, but she forced herself to keep moving through the metal passages above the warehouse floor. From her position in the ducts, she could see the entire operation below. The crew was professional and efficient, using cutting tools to break into the secured storage areas. They worked with military precision, and Sarah realized this wasn't their first job. Marcus coordinated their movements, his intimate knowledge of the facility making their work easier. But Sarah also noticed something the robbers had missed. Their getaway vehicles were parked in a position that would make escape difficult if the police arrived from the main road. More importantly, she could see that Marcus was becoming increasingly agitated as the job progressed. He kept looking toward the area where he had last seen her, and she could tell he was struggling with what he had done. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air, sooner than expected. Sarah realized that the security company's new rapid response protocol had worked. Help was almost here, but she was trapped in the ductwork, bleeding heavily, and watching the man she had trusted destroy everything she had worked to protect. As police cars surrounded the building, the crew began to panic. Their careful plan was falling apart, and Sarah knew that desperate criminals with guns were the most dangerous kind. She made a decision that would define the rest of this nightmare. Instead of waiting for rescue, she was going to act. The betrayal had cut deeper than any bullet, but Sarah Martinez was about to prove that some wounds only make you stronger. Blood dripped steadily from Sarah's wounds as she crawled through the narrow ventilation shaft, each movement sending waves of pain through her body. The metal ductwork groaned under her weight, and she knew she had to move carefully to avoid detection. Below, she could hear Marcus directing the crew with increasing urgency as police sirens grew louder. Her military training had taught her to assess her injuries quickly and honestly. The shoulder wound was painful but not life-threatening. The leg wound was more serious, affecting her mobility but missing major arteries. The back wound worried her most. She could feel numbness in her left foot, suggesting possible nerve damage. Despite her injuries, her mind remained sharp and focused on survival. Through the vent grates, Sarah watched the robbery unfold with professional interest. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, loading high-end electronics into duffel bags. She recognized the operation style from intelligence briefings she had received during her security training. This was likely the same crew responsible for 3 similar heists across Southern California in the past 6 months. Marcus kept glancing upward, and Sarah realized he was tracking her movement through the ductwork by the sounds she made. She forced herself to move more quietly, despite the pain that made her want to cry out. Every few feet she paused to listen and observe, gathering intelligence that might help the police when they arrived. The crew leader was becoming increasingly agitated. 5 more minutes, then we move, he barked at Marcus. Your girlfriend better not cause us any problems. She's hurt bad, Marcus replied, though Sarah could hear uncertainty in his voice. She probably can't even move. But Sarah was moving inch by agonizing inch toward the warehouse's electrical control panel. If she could reach it, she might be able to shut down the emergency lighting system, giving the arriving officers a tactical advantage. More importantly, it would demonstrate to Marcus and his accomplices that she was far from defeated. The police had surrounded the building now, their voices echoing through bullhorns as they demanded surrender. Sarah could see officers taking positions behind vehicles and concrete barriers. She knew they were following standard protocol for an active robbery situation, but they didn't know about her presence inside or the specific layout of the warehouse. Using her radio would have been ideal, but it had been damaged when she dove for cover during the initial shooting. Instead, she began working on a different plan. The warehouse's fire suppression system could be manually activated from the ductwork, and while it wouldn't stop the robbers, it would create confusion and provide cover for police entry. As she moved toward the suppression controls, Sarah heard Marcus arguing with the crew leader. The original plan had called for a quick in-and-out operation, but the early police response had trapped them inside. Now they were discussing hostage scenarios and fighting their way out, conversations that made Sarah's blood run cold. We should have killed her immediately, one of the crew members said. Now she's up there somewhere probably talking to the cops. She doesn't have a radio, Marcus insisted, and she's bleeding out. She won't be a problem. Sarah gritted her teeth and continued moving. Each inch forward was an act of defiance against Marcus's betrayal and the crew's assumptions about her capabilities. Her military training had prepared her for worse situations than this, and she was determined to prove that 4 bullets weren't enough to stop her. The suppression system controls were housed in a junction box mounted on the ductwork itself. Sarah carefully opened the panel, wincing as the movement pulled at her shoulder wound. Inside, she found the manual activation switch that would flood the warehouse floor with fire-suppressing foam. She hesitated for a moment, knowing that activating it would reveal her position but also knowing it might save lives. Before she could activate the system, she heard new voices below. The crew had taken 3 warehouse workers hostage, employees who had arrived for the morning shift and walked unknowingly into the robbery. Sarah's heart sank as she recognized the voices of her co-workers, people she had shared coffee with just hours earlier. The situation had escalated beyond a simple robbery. Now it was a hostage crisis, and Sarah knew the police would be forced to negotiate rather than assault the building. This gave the crew more time to complete their robbery and potentially escape, but it also gave Sarah more time to act. She made a decision that would have seemed impossible an hour earlier. Instead of activating the suppression system and revealing her position, she began moving toward the area where the hostages were being held. If she could create a distraction at the right moment, she might be able to help her co-workers escape. The pain in her back was getting worse, and she could feel her strength ebbing with each drop of blood she lost. But anger was a powerful motivator, and Sarah's anger at Marcus's betrayal burned hotter than her physical pain. He had not only betrayed her personally but had put innocent people in danger. As she moved through the ductwork above the hostages, Sarah could hear one of her co-workers crying softly. Betty Rodriguez was a grandmother who worked in the shipping department, known for bringing homemade cookies to share with the security team. The thought of Betty being terrorized by these criminals because of Marcus's greed filled Sarah with rage. Through a ceiling vent, she could see Marcus standing guard over the hostages while the other crew members continued loading stolen goods. His face was pale and his hands shook slightly as he held his weapon. Sarah realized that despite his betrayal, Marcus was in over his head. This wasn't the man she had fallen in love with. This was someone desperate and afraid. But her sympathy was limited. Marcus had made his choice when he decided to collaborate with criminals. Now Sarah had to make her own choices about how to respond. The old Sarah might have tried to talk him down, to appeal to whatever feelings he might still have for her. The Sarah bleeding in a ventilation duct had moved beyond such considerations. She began planning her next move carefully. The warehouse had multiple levels of ductwork, and she could use them to position herself above different areas of the building. If she timed it right, she might be able to coordinate her actions with the police assault team when they eventually moved in. As she planned, Sarah heard Marcus speaking to the hostages in a voice she barely recognized. "Nobody needs to get hurt here," he said. "Just stay quiet and this will all be over soon." But Sarah knew better. She had seen enough violence to recognize when a situation was spiraling out of control. The crew leader was growing more agitated by the minute, and desperate criminals with hostages rarely ended situations peacefully. She was probably the only person in a position to change the outcome. Despite her injuries and desperate circumstances, the warehouse had become a battlefield, and Sarah Martinez was about to prove that she was far from defeated. Sarah's breathing had become labored as blood loss began to take its toll, but her mind remained crystal clear. From her position in the ductwork, she had a complete view of the warehouse floor and could see that the crew was becoming increasingly desperate. The police negotiator's voice echoed through the building, requesting communication and offering safe passage in exchange for the hostages' release. The crew leader, who Sarah had mentally dubbed Scarface due to a prominent mark running down his left cheek, was having none of it. He paced back and forth, weapon in hand, clearly agitated by the police presence. "We stick to the plan," he kept saying to his men. "Grab what we can and shoot our way out." Marcus looked sick. Sarah could see the sweat beading on his forehead as he struggled with the reality of what he had helped set in motion. When he had agreed to provide inside information, he probably never imagined it would lead to a hostage situation with people he knew and worked with every day. Sarah began moving again, this time toward the warehouse's main electrical panel. If she could cut power to specific sections of the building, she might be able to create opportunities for the hostages to escape or for police to gain entry. But first, she needed to understand the crew's escape plan. Through careful observation, she pieced together their strategy. They had vehicles positioned at the loading dock, but police had already surrounded that area. However, there was an old maintenance tunnel that connected the warehouse to an adjacent building. Sarah knew about it because she had recommended it be sealed during a security audit 6 months earlier. Management had deemed it too expensive and left it open. The crew clearly knew about the tunnel as well. Sarah watched as one of the robbers consulted a hand-drawn map that showed the underground passage. Marcus must have provided that information too, she realized. The betrayal cut deeper with each revelation of how thoroughly he had planned this operation. As she moved through the ductwork toward the electrical panel, Sarah's injuries began to affect her coordination. The numbness in her left foot was spreading up her leg, and she had to rely more heavily on her arms to pull herself forward. Each movement left blood smears on the metal surface, creating a trail that might betray her position if anyone looked up. Below, she could hear Betty Rodriguez pleading with the robbers. "Please, I have grandchildren. I just want to go home to them." The sound of Betty's fear-filled voice strengthened Sarah's resolve. These weren't just abstract hostages. They were people she cared about, people who depended on her to keep them safe. That responsibility hadn't ended when Marcus put a gun on her. Sarah reached the electrical panel and carefully opened the access cover. The warehouse's lighting system was divided into 6 zones, each controlled by separate breakers. She could shut down power to the loading dock area, forcing the crew to rely on emergency lighting and making it harder for them to load their vehicles. More importantly, it would signal to the police that someone inside was still fighting. Before cutting the power, Sarah took one more look at the situation below. The crew had moved the hostages to the center of the warehouse, using them as human shields against potential police sniper fire from the windows. 3 robbers continued loading stolen goods while Scarface and Marcus maintained watch over the captives. Sarah made her decision and flipped the breakers for zones 3 and 4. Immediately, a large section of the warehouse plunged into darkness, leaving only emergency lighting to illuminate the area. The crew reacted with alarm, spinning around and pointing their weapons in all directions. "What the hell was that?" Scarface demanded. Marcus looked up at the ceiling, his eyes scanning the ductwork. "It might be her," he said quietly. "Your dead girlfriend is causing us problems from beyond the grave." Scarface sneered. "Find her and finish the job," but Marcus hesitated. Despite everything, some part of him still didn't want to hunt down the woman he had claimed to love. That hesitation would prove costly for the crew and beneficial for Sarah. Instead of sending Marcus to investigate, Scarface ordered one of his other men to check the electrical systems. This gave Sarah valuable information about the crew's hierarchy and decision-making process. More importantly, it confirmed that they didn't know the building as well as they thought they did. The robber sent to investigate the power outage headed directly toward the main electrical room on the ground floor, not realizing that the actual controls were distributed throughout the building. This gave Sarah time to move to her next position. She began crawling toward the area above the loading dock where the crew's vehicles waited. If she could disable their transportation, she could trap them in the building until police were ready to move in. The pain in her back was becoming unbearable, but adrenaline and determination kept her moving. As she moved, Sarah could hear the police negotiator attempting to establish communication with the crew. "This is Detective Rodriguez with the LAPD. We want to resolve this peacefully. What are your demands?" Scarface's response was predictable. "We want safe passage out of here. Clear the roads and give us 30 minutes head start, or we start shooting hostages." Sarah knew the police would never agree to those terms, especially since they probably had snipers positioned around the building by now. The situation was heading toward a violent conclusion unless someone changed the dynamic. That someone would have to be her. She reached the area above the loading dock and looked down at the crew's escape vehicles. 2 black SUVs sat idling, ready for a quick getaway. Between the ductwork and the vehicles, Sarah estimated a drop of about 12 feet. In her current condition, that fall might kill her, but it might also be her only chance to prevent the crew's escape. Through the loading dock's windows, she could see police tactical teams taking positions. They were preparing for an assault, but the presence of hostages would limit their options. Sarah realized she might be in a unique position to tip the balance in law enforcement's favor. She began working on a new plan, one that would require her to leave the relative safety of the ductwork and engage the robbers directly. It was essentially a suicide mission for someone with her injuries, but the alternative was watching innocent people die because of Marcus's betrayal. As she prepared to make her move, Sarah heard Marcus's voice below. He was talking to Betty, trying to calm her down. "It's going to be okay," he said. "Nobody wants to hurt you." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. Marcus was comforting a woman he had helped put in danger, showing compassion for a hostage while having shown none for the woman who had loved him. The contradiction made her realize that Marcus was compartmentalizing his actions, probably telling himself he was still a good person despite his choices. That self-deception was about to end. Sarah Martinez was about to remind Marcus exactly what kind of person he had chosen to become, and exactly what kind of person he had chosen to betray. The hunt was about to begin, but Marcus wasn't going to be the hunter. He was going to be the prey. Sarah's plan was born from desperation and fury in equal measure. She couldn't disable the vehicles from her position in the ductwork, but she could create chaos that would force the crew to split their attention between the hostages and multiple threats. The key was making them believe they were under coordinated attack from multiple directions. She began by disconnecting several sections of ductwork near the loading dock. The metal pieces fell with loud crashes, creating the impression that police were breaching the building from above. The crew immediately went into defensive positions, with two of them abandoning the stolen goods to investigate the noise. While they were distracted, Sarah dropped a small section of metal ductwork directly onto one of the getaway vehicles, setting off its alarm. The piercing sound mixed with the warehouse alarms created a cacophony that made communication nearly impossible for the robbers. Scarface was shouting orders that no one could hear clearly. Marcus looked increasingly panicked as he realized the situation was spiraling completely out of control. The carefully planned robbery had become a chaotic nightmare, and Sarah was the one turning their advantages into liabilities. From her new position, Sarah could see that one of the robbers was moving toward the maintenance tunnel she had identified earlier. If he reached it and confirmed it was still open, the crew would have their escape route. She couldn't allow that to happen. Using a piece of broken ductwork as a projectile, Sarah managed to knock over a stack of boxes near the tunnel entrance, blocking the passage temporarily. The robber investigating the area had to stop and clear the debris, buying precious time for the police response. But Sarah's actions were taking a toll on her already weakened body. Each movement sent sharp pains through her wounds, and she could feel her strength fading. Blood loss was making her dizzy, and she knew she was operating on borrowed time. If she was going to make a difference, it had to be soon. She made a decision that would have seemed insane an hour earlier. Instead of staying hidden in the ductwork, she was going to come down and confront the crew directly. Her military training had taught her that sometimes the best defense was an unexpected offense. Sarah positioned herself above the area where Marcus was guarding the hostages. She could see Betty Rodriguez and two other employees huddled together, terrified but unharmed. Marcus stood about 10 feet away, his weapon held nervously as he scanned the warehouse for threats. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Sarah. Marcus was looking for dangers from the police, while the greatest threat to his operation was directly above him, bleeding and planning his downfall. She had become the hunter, and he was the prey who didn't even know he was being stalked. She waited for the right moment, when Marcus was distracted by Scarface's shouted orders. Then she dropped from the ductwork directly behind him, landing hard on the concrete floor. Her injured leg nearly gave out, but adrenaline kept her upright. "Hello, Marcus," she said quietly. He spun around, his face going white as he saw her bloody, battered figure standing behind him. For a moment, neither of them moved. The hostages looked up in shock, recognizing their security coordinator despite her injuries. "Sarah, you're supposed to be dead," Marcus whispered. "Sorry to disappoint you," she replied. "But we need to talk." Marcus raised his weapon, but his hands were shaking badly. Sarah could see the internal conflict playing out on his face. Despite everything, he was struggling with the idea of shooting her at point-blank range. "Put the gun down, Marcus," Sarah said, taking a step closer. "This has gone far enough." The hostages watched in stunned silence as the drama unfolded. Betty Rodriguez had tears streaming down her face, but Sarah could see hope in her eyes now that help had arrived in an unexpected form. "I can't," Marcus said. "I'm in too deep. If I stop now, they'll kill me." "They're going to kill you anyway," Sarah replied. "You're a liability to them. Once they don't need your knowledge of this place, you're just another witness." Scarface had noticed the commotion and was moving toward them, his weapon raised. Sarah knew she had only seconds before the situation exploded into violence. She made her final appeal to whatever remained of the man she had once loved. "You can still do the right thing," she said. "Help me get these people out of here." For a moment, Marcus seemed to consider it. But then Scarface arrived, taking in the scene with cold calculation. "Well, well," he said. "The dead woman walks. Marcus, finish what you started." But Marcus hesitated, and that hesitation sealed his fate. Scarface raised his own weapon, clearly intending to eliminate both Marcus and Sarah as unreliable complications to his operation. Sarah moved faster than anyone expected from someone with her injuries. She lunged forward, knocking Marcus aside just as Scarface fired. The bullet intended for Marcus struck the concrete wall behind them, sending chips of masonry flying. "Run!" Sarah shouted to the hostages. "Get to the emergency exits!" Betty Rodriguez and the other employees didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled away from the gunfight that was about to erupt, heading for the nearest exit. Their escape triggered the crew's emergency protocols, with robbers abandoning their positions to pursue the fleeing hostages. In the chaos, Sarah found herself face to face with Marcus again. He had lost his weapon in the confusion and was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Fear, certainly, but also something that might have been regret. "Why did you save me?" he asked. "Because despite everything, you're still human," Sarah replied. "But that doesn't mean I forgive you." Scarface was regrouping his men, shouting orders to recapture the hostages and eliminate the threats. Sarah knew they had only moments before the crew reasserted control of the situation. She also knew that in her current condition, she couldn't fight multiple armed opponents, but she had accomplished something important. The hostages were free, and the crew's careful plan had collapsed into chaos. More importantly, she had forced Marcus to confront the reality of his situation. He was no longer a willing participant in the robbery. He was a victim of his own poor choices, trapped between the police and his criminal partners. "Marcus," she said urgently, "you know this building better than they do. Help me end this." For a crucial moment, Marcus looked like he might agree, but then gunfire erupted from multiple directions as police began their assault on the building. The tactical team had used the chaos Sarah created to begin their breach operation. In the confusion of gunfire and shouting, Sarah lost sight of Marcus. She could see muzzle flashes in the darkness and hear orders being shouted by both police and robbers. The warehouse had become a battlefield, and she was caught in the middle with limited mobility and no weapon. But Sarah Martinez had already proven that she was far from helpless. As the battle for the warehouse intensified, she prepared for the most dangerous phase of her ordeal. The hunt was about to become a fight to the death, and she intended to be among the survivors. The warehouse exploded into a war zone as the police tactical team breached multiple entry points simultaneously. Flashbang grenades detonated with blinding light and deafening noise, adding to the chaos that Sarah had already created. She found herself crawling behind a concrete support pillar as bullets flew overhead from both directions. The crew had taken defensive positions throughout the warehouse, using the stolen merchandise and warehouse equipment as cover. Scarface was coordinating their resistance from behind a forklift, shouting orders that were barely audible over the gunfire. Sarah could see that they were trying to fight their way toward the maintenance tunnel she had partially blocked earlier. Through the smoke and darkness, she spotted Marcus pinned down behind a stack of pallets about 30 feet away. His weapon had been lost in the initial chaos, and he looked terrified as bullets splintered the wood around him. Despite everything he had done, Sarah felt a stab of concern for his safety, but her attention was quickly diverted by a more immediate threat. One of the robbers was moving toward her position, apparently having spotted her blood trail in the emergency lighting. Sarah realized she had left a clear path that any trained observer could follow. Her injuries had made her careless. The approaching robber was methodical in his advance, using cover effectively as he closed the distance. Sarah knew she had only moments before he would have a clear shot at her position. With her limited mobility, running wasn't an option. She would have to fight. Looking around desperately, Sarah spotted a piece of the metal ductwork she had knocked down earlier. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. She gripped it tightly, ignoring the pain that shot through her shoulder wound. When the robber rounded the pillar, weapon raised, Sarah swung the metal pipe with all her remaining strength. It connected with his gun hand, sending the weapon spinning away into the darkness. The robber cursed and lunged at her, but Sarah's military training kicked in despite her injuries. She used his momentum against him, redirecting his attack and sending him stumbling into the concrete pillar. The impact stunned him long enough for Sarah to grab his dropped weapon. Now she was armed again, though her hands were shaking from blood loss and exhaustion. The tactical radio on the unconscious robber crackled with police communications. Sarah could hear the team leaders coordinating their assault, searching for hostages and identifying threats. She grabbed the radio and managed to establish contact with the team leader. "This is Sarah Martinez, warehouse security." She gasped into the radio. "I'm wounded but mobile. 3 hostages escaped through the north emergency exit. Remaining suspects are trying to reach the maintenance tunnel in the southwest corner." The response was immediate. "Copy that, Sarah. Stay put and identify yourself to our teams with your hands visible. Medical is standing by." But Sarah had no intention of staying put. She could see that Marcus was still trapped in the firefight, and despite his betrayal, she couldn't abandon him to die. More importantly, she knew the warehouse layout better than the tactical team, and her knowledge could save lives. She began moving again, using the shadows and smoke to mask her approach toward Marcus's position. The gunfire was intense but not random. The police team was advancing methodically, clearing sectors as they moved. The robbers were being pushed back toward the maintenance tunnel, exactly as Sarah had predicted. As she moved, Sarah could see Scarface making desperate decisions. He had realized that their escape route was compromised and their position was hopeless. That made him extremely dangerous, as cornered criminals often chose to go down fighting rather than surrender. She watched in horror as Scarface grabbed an emergency axe from a fire station and began advancing toward Marcus's position. His intention was clear. If he couldn't escape, he would eliminate the witnesses who could identify him, starting with his inside man. "Marcus," Sarah shouted, her voice carrying over the din of battle. "Behind you!" Marcus looked up just as Scarface raised the axe. Time seemed to slow as Sarah realized she was too far away to intervene physically. Without hesitation, she raised the captured weapon and fired. The shot took Scarface in the shoulder, spinning him around and causing him to drop the axe. He fell to the ground, clutching his wound and screaming in pain and rage. Marcus scrambled away from the immediate danger, his eyes wide with shock at how close he had come to death. But Sarah's shot had also revealed her position to the remaining robbers. 2 of them immediately began firing in her direction, forcing her to dive for cover again. Concrete chips exploded around her as bullets struck the pillar she was hiding behind. The tactical team responded to the new gunfire by accelerating their advance. Sarah could hear them moving through the warehouse, their coordinated movements and professional communication a stark contrast to the panicked actions of the remaining robbers. In the chaos, she lost sight of Marcus again. The smoke from the flashbang grenades was thick, and the emergency lighting cast confusing shadows throughout the warehouse. Sarah knew she was running on fumes now. Blood loss had left her weak and disoriented. She tried to reach the tactical radio again, but the device had been damaged during her dive for cover. Sparks flew from its broken antenna, leaving her cut off from police communication. She was alone in the battle zone, wounded and exhausted. The gunfire began to diminish as the tactical team gained control of the situation. Sarah could hear surrender calls and the metallic sound of weapons being dropped. The organized resistance was collapsing, but scattered threats remained. Through the thinning smoke, she saw a figure moving toward the maintenance tunnel. It was Marcus, apparently trying to escape through the same route the robbers had planned to use. The sight filled her with a mixture of anger and disappointment. Even after she had saved his life, he was still trying to run. Sarah forced herself to stand, using the concrete pillar for support. Her legs were barely holding her weight, and dark spots danced at the edges of her vision. But she wasn't finished yet. Marcus had started this nightmare with his betrayal, and she was going to end it. The maintenance tunnel was partially blocked by the debris she had knocked down earlier, but it was still passable for someone desperate enough to try. Sarah could see Marcus struggling to move the obstacles, his movements frantic as he tried to escape before the police found him. She began moving toward the tunnel, each step an effort of will over her body's demand to rest. Behind her, she could hear police officers securing the warehouse and calling for medical assistance. The battle was nearly over, but her personal war with Marcus was just beginning. As she approached the tunnel entrance, Marcus looked up and saw her coming. His face was a mask of fear and desperation, the charming man she had once loved completely gone. In his place was someone she didn't recognize, someone capable of betraying everything and everyone for money. "Sarah, please," he said, his voice breaking. "Let me go. You'll never see me again." Sarah raised the weapon she had taken from the robber, her hands steadier than they had any right to be given her condition. "You're right about one thing," she said. This is the last time we'll see each other. But you're not walking away from this. The confrontation that had begun with betrayal and gunshots was about to reach its conclusion in the darkness of an underground tunnel. Sarah Martinez had dragged herself through hell to reach this moment, and she intended to finish what Marcus had started. The maintenance tunnel was dark and cramped, lit only by the emergency lighting that filtered down from the warehouse above. Sarah and Marcus faced each other in the narrow space, the weight of betrayal and violence hanging between them like a physical presence. Her weapon was trained on him, but her hands trembled from blood loss and exhaustion. 3 years, Marcus, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 years I trusted you. I brought you to family dinners. I talked about a future with you. And this whole time you were planning to destroy everything. Marcus backed deeper into the tunnel, his hands raised but his eyes searching for an escape route. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he said. You weren't supposed to get hurt. The plan was simple. They get their merchandise, I get my money, and nobody gets injured. But people did get hurt, Sarah replied, feeling the pain from her 4 gunshot wounds like punctuation marks in her accusation. Betty Rodriguez is traumatized. Your coworkers will never feel safe again. And you tried to kill me, the woman you claimed to love. The sound of police officers moving through the warehouse above them grew louder. Sarah knew that discovery was inevitable, but she wanted this confrontation to end on her terms. Marcus had taken away her ability to trust, her sense of security, and nearly her life. She deserved to be the one who brought him to justice. I never wanted to hurt you specifically, Marcus said, desperation creeping into his voice. When I saw you there that morning, I panicked. Scarface said we had to eliminate witnesses, and I couldn't think straight. So you shot me 4 times, Sarah said flatly. That's not panic, Marcus. That's attempted murder. Marcus flinched at the words but continued trying to justify his actions. I was in debt, Sarah. Gambling debts to some very dangerous people. They were going to kill me if I didn't pay up. This robbery was my only way out. Sarah felt a familiar stab of pain, but this time it wasn't from her physical wounds. Even now, in this moment of absolute truth, Marcus was making excuses. He couldn't simply admit that he had chosen money over the lives of innocent people, chosen personal gain over the woman who loved him. You had other choices, she said. You could have come to me. We could have worked something out. Instead, you chose to become a criminal. The tunnel was getting colder, and Sarah could feel her strength fading rapidly. She knew she needed medical attention soon, but she couldn't let Marcus escape to potentially hurt other innocent people. Her training and her conscience both demanded that she see this through to the end. Sarah, please, Marcus begged. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I really am sorry. Let me go and I promise you'll never see me again. You're right, Sarah said. Sorry doesn't mean anything now. But I'm not going to let you disappear so you can destroy someone else's life. She could hear police officers calling her name in the warehouse above. The tactical team had realized she was missing and was conducting a search. Soon they would find the tunnel entrance and discover both of them. Sarah wanted to deliver Marcus to justice personally, as the victim who had refused to become a statistic. Turn around and put your hands behind your head, she ordered. We're going back up there together. But Marcus had one more surprise left. As he turned around, he suddenly spun back and lunged at her, apparently deciding that fighting a wounded woman was his best chance for escape. His move caught Sarah off guard, and they struggled in the narrow confines of the tunnel. Sarah's injuries made it difficult to maintain her grip on the weapon, and Marcus managed to knock it from her hands. It clattered away into the darkness, leaving them to fight with bare hands. Despite her wounds, Sarah's military training gave her advantages that Marcus hadn't expected. She used his momentum against him, redirecting his charge into the tunnel wall. The impact stunned him, and Sarah managed to get behind him and apply a chokehold she had learned in hand-to-hand combat training. Marcus struggled, but blood loss had made Sarah desperate, and desperation gave her strength. It's over, Marcus, she gasped as she maintained the hold. Stop fighting and maybe you'll live through this. Marcus's struggles grew weaker as the chokehold took effect. Just as he was losing consciousness, bright flashlight beams illuminated the tunnel from above. The police tactical team had found them. LAPD, drop your weapons and show your hands, came the shouted command. Sarah immediately released Marcus and raised her hands despite the pain it caused. I'm Sarah Martinez, warehouse security, she called out. This is Marcus Chen, the inside man for the robbery. He's unconscious but alive. The tactical team rappelled into the tunnel with professional efficiency, quickly securing both Sarah and the unconscious Marcus. Paramedics followed immediately, and Sarah felt overwhelming relief as medical professionals began treating her wounds. As she was loaded onto a stretcher, Sarah could see the warehouse being secured above them. All of the robbers were either dead or in custody, and the stolen merchandise was being recovered. The crisis was over, but the aftermath was just beginning. At the hospital, as doctors worked to stabilize her condition, Sarah learned the full scope of Marcus's betrayal. He had been feeding information to the robbery crew for months, helping them target multiple warehouses across the region. His gambling debts were real, but they were much smaller than he had claimed. Greed, not desperation, had been his primary motivation. During her recovery, Sarah received visits from Betty Rodriguez and the other hostages she had helped save. Their gratitude was overwhelming, but Sarah struggled with feelings of guilt and failure. As head of security, she felt responsible for not detecting Marcus's treachery earlier. The trial became a media sensation, with Sarah's survival story capturing national attention. Marcus was convicted on multiple charges, including attempted murder, armed robbery, and conspiracy. He received a sentence of 25 years to life, with no possibility of parole for 15 years. At his sentencing, Marcus finally offered an apology that seemed genuine. "I destroyed the life of the only person who ever really loved me," he said, looking directly at Sarah. "I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't deserve it. But I want Sarah to know that my actions had nothing to do with her worth as a person. She deserves so much better than what I gave her." Sarah attended the sentencing but didn't speak to Marcus directly. She had said everything she needed to say in that maintenance tunnel. Her focus now was on healing and rebuilding her life. The physical recovery took months. 2 of the gunshot wounds had caused permanent damage, leaving Sarah with limited mobility in her left leg and chronic pain in her back. But the emotional healing took longer. Trust, once broken so completely, was difficult to rebuild. Eventually, Sarah returned to work in security, but at a different company and with enhanced protocols for background checks and employee monitoring. She became an advocate for workplace safety and developed training programs to help other security professionals recognize insider threats. Years later, Sarah would reflect on that terrible day as a turning point in her life. She had learned that betrayal could come from the people closest to you, but she had also learned that survival was possible even in the darkest circumstances. Most importantly, she had proven to herself that when everything was stripped away, trust, safety, she still had the strength to fight for what was right. Marcus had taken many things from her that September morning, but he hadn't taken her spirit. Despite 4 gunshot wounds and the ultimate betrayal, Sarah Martinez had dragged both herself and her betrayer through the chaos of battle to emerge victorious. In the end, justice had prevailed, and she had reclaimed her power from the man who had tried to destroy her.